coming from that position of understanding the truth that the default is suffering, and understanding that any means that I try to be happy are futile in the sense that they can't last. We then turn our attention to practicing mindfulness for insight. We practice studying this body and this mind rather than trying to make them happy or merely appease their desires, which only act as very short distractions from the default state of suffering. You see, so what we do is we then have to turn our attention to this body and mind and study and see the truth of them, rather than just try to find happy places, happy spaces that are extremely temporary, whether it be a movie or a holiday or a coffee or even a little meditation, if we're good enough at meditation for it to be a happy thing for more than a few moments at a time. This is all coming from our motivation of trying to be happy, and so we need to have a different attitude towards it, that instead of just trying to be happy all the time, I'm going to work instead at facing this suffering, this default suffering, and study this default suffering. And what is it that's suffering? Well, it's the body that's suffering and it's the mind that's suffering. So we have to turn our attention to the body and to the mind. And if we do so with the correct instructions, the way that the Buddha intended, then it actually does stick. It sticks for periods where the mind actually becomes more interested in studying and seeing the truth of the body and mind than it does in just trying to get happiness out of sense desire. So I'll give everyone some reminders and some teachings on how to make it stick, in a sense, how to get this mind of ours that is so interested in sense pleasure and so interested in being distracted, to get it to automatically be interested in our own body, our own mind, our own heart, so that we can make our way through this suffering by way of seeing it and understanding it and not continuously being distracted by it. So what we require here is the mindfulness. Now, I should back up just a second and say that there are two ways in order to bring or have the attention on our own body and mind, which is ultimately what is going to free us from the body and mind and free us from the suffering, is starting by having our attention on these things. There are two ways. One way to have the attention on the body and the mind is to hold attention on the body and mind, right? So if we're walking around, or we're sitting, or we're breathing, or we're moving, or we're scratching, or we're yawning, to actually, instead of being just lost in our stories and our thoughts and our ideas about who we are and what we're doing, navigating the world, that we also are able to pay attention to the movements of the body. So, for example, as I'm talking now, even though there's nobody in front of me, I'm using my hands to help talk, so I can notice that my hand is moving. I can notice that my head turns, or my foot lifts, or my face smiles. So we can intentionally become interested in the movements of the body. We can intentionally become interested and bring that attention towards this body, or even this breath, because the breath is always happening, right? So if our body is moving, we can pay attention to the body moving. We can try to maintain some attention with the body and its walking and its movements as it's walking, reaching, turning, standing. When we're sitting, if we're not moving and just sitting still, we can then pay attention to the movement of the breath. The body is moving as a result of the breath moving in and out. At the chest, at the abdomen, the shoulders, just in general, sensing the movement of the body as the air makes its way in and out, the expansion and contraction, the upward movement of the shoulders and chest, perhaps, but whatever it might be, just to be coming back intentionally to be able to notice this body. And we do this rather than being in our stories and our ideas, which are distracting ourselves from the real issue here, the predominant issue that's going on, which is this body and mind are suffering. We don't generally pay attention to it, accept it. We even do the opposite. We deny it and say, yeah, we're doing great, life is good, we're happy. But even if we're in a place where life is good and life is happy, you can see that that's a very temporary thing, isn't it? And certainly a very fragile thing, right? You could just take a particular person out of your life, or your financial situation out of your life, or your house is on fire, or whatever it might be, and then that happiness is nowhere to be found, right? So it's relying on the world, family, friends, financials, maybe even our outfit or what we're wearing, our makeup on our face, or a ring on our finger, or whatever it might be. There are certainly many, many factors that have to be in place for us to feel like things are going well. So you can see that at the root of it isn't really going well, because if all the good stuff was taken away, what would be the default? You see, so that the happiness is just stuff piled up on top of a fragile platform that is willing to, that can fall over at any time, as soon as something that we're relying on for our happiness is being taken away. So we have to come back to see those things that are actually suffering at the root of this, and that's this body and this mind. So the two ways to do that, and hopefully we're working on doing this as I'm speaking, is intentionally being with the body, keeping attention on the breath, keeping attention on the body as it moves. Right? That's one way. And that way is called in Buddhism Samatha, the way of intentionally keeping attention on the body or on the mind. And if we're doing a nice job at this, there'll be happiness that emerges, but this isn't insight happiness or enlightenment happiness or even true mindfulness happiness, but this is just the happiness of getting a break from being busy in our mind and busy trying to achieve happiness through the senses, looking for sense desire. So we keep attention on our body or on our breath, or we keep attention on our mind. How can we keep attention on our mind? Well, perhaps we keeping attention on how we're feeling. We could keep attention on a spaciousness, if we're good at that type of thing, or a silence that's available underneath all the sounds in a moment. We're just trying to stay very present. And that's mostly what the spiritual teachers will teach about these days, is a type of samatha, a type of holding where we're either blocking out thoughts or not paying attention to the thoughts as much, and we're being more with something that's actually here and real and staying with it. And so the result will be a happiness that is certainly temporary, but it gives the mind a break. It gives a true break from being in the incessant thoughts. The types of breaks that we normally try to take, like watching TV, drinking, and these types of things, aren't really breaks for the mind. They're just breaks from thinking about the difficulties of our lives, and we want to think about something else. And that's often the best thing we can think of to do when we don't understand meditation, when we don't know about our potential as human beings and our goals and our life purpose and how that's all accomplished. Then what we end up doing instead is we end up doing things to numb all the thoughts, like drinking, drugs, or television, so that we're still busy thinking. If you take a look, there's thinking going on constantly, and it's still very tiring, and it's still suffering going on. It's just we make it all kind of dull and thinking about things that don't relate to us, so that the emotions don't get as riled up in the sense that they don't feel personal and it doesn't hurt quite as much. Right? It's a sad state of affairs when that's what we have to do to not face ourselves. When we make those types of choices for our rest all the time and not come back and see what's motivating it all. In fact, moving into rest states involving drugs, alcohol, and binging on television, not having a nice moderation between distraction and television things, and then coming back to do things that develop us and true rests for the mind. Doing that is very dangerous in building negative habits towards dullness, and we actually start to resemble animals. A lot of the beings in the animal kingdom, like buffaloes and cows and dogs, have a blurry, dull, not knowing who or where they are kind of state that is hovering around their brain and in their eyes. They're quite dull. And so we don't want to, with all our potential, with a human mind, to be building habits where we are in such states that often that we're moving towards animal. We're capable of far more than that. So instead, we bring our attention back to our body or aspects of our mind, to return to things that are really there and actually give our mind a true rest. And that's a different level of happiness, a different quality of happiness, however temporary, than just being with all the world and its distractions. We're moving closer to what's real, and we're getting a true rest for the mind. That's called samatha. We'll be more peaceful temporarily, we'll be more happy temporarily, and we'll certainly be more good temporarily, meaning we'll have a more wholesome heart temporarily. And it's necessary to practice doing such things, even a few minutes every day, so that our mind actually gets a rest, because otherwise it doesn't truly get a rest. The best we can do, like I said, is make the mind a bit dull for a rest, and it's not really a rest. It's the mind still thinking, and it's in a very uncomfortable state in the background, moving in the wrong direction from the goal of humanity, from our purpose. So there's another way as well. Not this holding, but there's another way that we can achieve happiness.